G'day guys, one of the things that Arcs of Omen has brought to this new season of Warhammer 40k is free Wargear upgrades for a whole ton of units. And basically there's a lot of people talking about how much they love this and how it's brought new life, a new lease of life to some of their favorite units, but then there's also other people that see significant challenges with this new system. I count myself among those who see this as a significant challenge and a significant threat to the existing way that Warhammer 40k is played, in a very negative way. So I want to basically outline my concerns in this video, share them with you, and then get a conversation going in the comments below about your thoughts on this topic and whether or not you think that free Wargear is a disaster for the game the same way that I do, or whether you think I'm wrong and that it's actually a good thing overall. So with that being said, let's just jump straight into the video.
Welcome to the Black God!
G'day guys, thought I'd just take a moment to weigh in on this debate that's raging online about free Wargear and whether or not it's good for the game or bad. So most of you will have known by now that Arcs of Omen, the new season of competitive 40k, has basically unlocked free Wargear for almost all Marine units, and as well as a smattering of other factions. Interestingly, it's not across every faction, which I thought was it's an interesting tell by GW. I think what they're doing is they're using the Marine player base to test something out, to see whether or not it's going to be viable as an option for 10th edition. And basically the way this is, the reason I believe that is because if they were truly trying to do it because this was the direction that they wanted to head in, they would have just done it for every faction. They would have increased the base points cost on every unit, and then given all units free Wargear. But they haven't done that. They've done it specifically and only for Marines. And people will say, look, this is an attempt to balance Marines out. But I don't think that's the case, because if they wanted to balance Marines out, they would just make Marines cheaper, right? Like, why would they adopt a different method for determining the points costs of a unit? You know, some units it's you pay for the models and the upgrades. Some units you pay for the whole lot in one go. There's two different methods employed here. So I don't think it's a balancing thing as much as it is a test. I think they're testing the community to see how they react to free Wargear. And with that in mind, here's my reaction. It's fucking garbage. So the problem I have there's several problems that I have with free Wargear, and there's almost no bonuses. So I guess I'll say the thing I like about it first, because that's very quick and easy. I like it because it means that some of the more interesting and exciting options become viable. You know, like previously, you know, when you're running Chaos Space Marine squads, for example, you were very rarely paying the points for the, you know, the giant chain axe and a power fist on the sergeant and a multi-melee. You could be very rarely paying the points for all these upgrades because they weren't costed effectively, right? And it would be a hard thing for them to, you know, really nail that points cost. So often you were just like, nah, it's just not worth upgrading the units. Whereas now, it is worth upgrading them, and the unit actually now fills a very different role. It fills a role that it couldn't previously do, really. Like, it's now a damage dealing unit, and that makes it a little bit more interesting, right? You know, those thunder hammers on your sergeants in your Space Marine squads, and now it's an interesting thing because now that unit does something fundamentally different on the battlefield. Instead of just being, you know, your cheap mandatory troops attacks, you know, now they're like, well, hang on, they're actually good. They actually punch hard. So it's interesting in that regard. It actually changes the dynamic of the units in a fundamental way. They change their battlefield role, essentially, you know, from going from the thing that's just there so that you have some objectives secured in your list and they're just there for capping objectives. Well, now, for no additional points, they're actually something that can do that and something that can punch hard. And you might think, oh, just a single Thunderhammer in a unit of Space Marines, it's not that big of a deal. But it's like, if one of your characters gets caught slipping, and they're able to charge into it, and they're like, cool, this is a squad of 5 tactical marines with a thunderhammer on the sergeant. Well, that could potentially kill your Dark Apostle. You know, that could kill your Master of Possessions, because it's a thunderhammer. It's flat 3 damage. So it actually turns those little pointless units into actual meaningful things on the tabletop, and I do like that. I like the way it means that a lot of the units that were previously considered tax, it's actually tax that you get to do something with, which makes it not tax anymore. It actually makes it value. So I like that about it, and I don't see another way of realistically achieving that outside of having really, really cheap war gear. But essentially free war gear is just the full expression of cheap war gear, right? Because like if a thunderhammer costs 1 point, it would be an auto include, so everyone would have one, at which case it might as well be free because it's so cheap, right? So that's the thing I like about free war gear. But now let's talk about some of the challenges that it presents, because it actually is quite a disaster for the game, in my opinion. So the first one, and this is in no particular order, but the first one that comes to mind is when you have an army list where you've got like 10 points left over and you've got to try to figure out how to spend them, right? Say you're going to a 2,000 point event, you've spent 1990 and you've got 10 points left over. The war gear options are a really good place to find 10 extra points to spend. You know, you'd be like, oh cool, I've got 10 points left over, I'll chuck a melter gun on that squad, cool, done. Right now I'm 2,000 points. So having purchasable war gear adds an element of granularity to the list building that allows you to sort of do different things, you know. Whereas taking that away, which you'll feel it if you've tried to write Chaos Demons lists, you'll feel it if you tried to write World Eaters lists, and you're probably feeling it as you try to write your Space Marine lists, maybe to a lesser extent, but Demons is my perfect case study because they have no war gear whatsoever. They've got just nothing, right? So sometimes I'll write a Chaos Demons list and I'll be like, yep, cool, I'm going to go Khorne themed, I'm going to run all this, you know, Bloodthirsters and Bloodletters and whatever, and you'll get to a list that's like 1960 points. So you got 40 points left to spend, and you just can't spend them because there's no upgrades on the units you've selected, and the other units that you would add all cost more than 40 points. So you're like, there's actually no possible way for me to spend that remaining, you know, those remaining points. And this is because things like icons are free, things like the instruments, they're all free. And it's like, it's all well and good for them to be free, but what if I wanted to, imagine if those icons and instruments cost 5 points, which is baked into the squad, right? So now if I've taken 3 squads, well now I can go, you know what, I'm going to choose not to put the icons on them, which means that now instead of having, you know, 40 points left over, I actually have 80 points left over, and now that's enough to get another character, you know, or another, you know, something like that. Or go, cool, I'm going to actually take more upgrades on the unit, unnecessary upgrades, to fill out those last 40 points. So having that granularity allows you to sort of finalize the list in a way, and that's completely lacking if you don't have purchasable upgrades on your units. So that's the first challenge that I have with it, which just is a fundamental game design challenge. The next is that the incentive to take different units is gone. Like when you're looking at a unit, there'd be no reason to take a unit with no war gear when the war gear is free. Which means every unit that you're going to see is just going to have maxed out war gear and be exactly the same. You know, maybe there'll be some slight differences, like some of them might take las cannons, some of them might take heavy bolters as their, you know, special weapon, as their heavy weapon. Some of them, you know, the sergeant might take a power fist, some of them might take a lightning claw, you know, like, you know, he might take a thunderhammer. So there'll be some variation within that, but every unit's going to be just maxed out to the nines, you know. And to me, that's boring in terms of, you know, the potential variations you'll see on the tabletop. You know, it's nice when sometimes you see, you know, in an ideal world, you want to be able to see your opponent's army and be like, oh, I played this opponent round 1. He had no upgrades on his stuff, but he had lots of units. And then round 2, oh, this guy had fewer units, but they were all upgraded to the guilds. Like, that makes it interesting. That makes each list feel different. Whereas the direction that we're headed with free war gear, everybody's just going to max out their squads. And that's boring as. Like, you want to be able to see variation. That's the whole part of the, balancing things, is to create variation. If you didn't care about variation, you wouldn't care about balance. You'd be happy with Votann just being OP as fuck and everybody running Votann. You'd be like, that's fine. But the reason that you want balance is because you want variation. That's the key to trying to create balance, is making it so that different options are viable. So free war gear is antithetical to that. It actually works directly against variation. So for those of you out there who want balance, you don't want free war gear. It's the exact opposite of what you want. It might feel good on your units to receive free war gear, and when you look at it in a vacuum, hell yeah, free war gear is cool. But when you actually look at the broader impact on the game, free war gear actually just means everybody's units are all going to be the same loadout. They're all going to be buffed up to hell. And that's boring. You want to see some units running around with no upgrades and they're just there to score things. Even sometimes within the same list. Sometimes you'll be like, I've got 3, say tactical squads or 3 squads of legionaries. We'll use legionaries because it's a chaos channel. So say you got 3 units of legionaries. Maybe you want 1 unit of 5 with no war gear. And then you want 1 unit of 10 that has all the war gear. And that unit of 10 sits inside a rhino. And then, that rhino is hidden behind a wall somewhere, so that turn 1 you can disembark out of the rhino, fire your las cannon downrange, fire your melter gun at something close by, charge something with your heavy chain axe. Like, that's really cool. But you don't want to have a fucking heavy chain axe on the unit of 5 that you've just brought as a backfield screen. So, but now it's just like, well, it's free, so you might as well. And it's like, oh, that sucks some of the fun out. It sucks some of the diversity out of your list. And it means that those 2 units, now they kind of feel the same. They kind of just feel like they're the same thing, but one's slightly bigger than the other. And that's really uninspiring and, unexciting. So that's the next challenge I have with the free war gear. Then you've got the fact that people have already built these models, So it really sucks for those people who really care about their models. They got really beautiful models, and now they have to run out and snap all their arms off in order to upgrade the weapons. And it's like, no, why? Like, they don't want to do this, but in order to remain competitively viable, they have to, and that just sucks. Like, they shouldn't have to, Frankenstein monster their fucking units back together. It actually destroys the quality of the game, because a lot of the quality of the game comes from the fact that it's beautiful minis. If they take that away by having people have to hack them apart, that feels bad. But if people don't hack them apart, well, now their army's it's like objectively worse, because it's not like they're making an important decision to not include that war gear. They're just not including it, just making their units just objectively worse. And that sucks too, So either way, you've got these people with established armies are in a real shit spot, because how are they supposed to navigate that? And so realistically, the free war gear is going to alienate and piss off a very large portion of the player base. The argument would be that they're going to have to go out and buy more instead of snapping them, and hopefully they've kept their bits box, kept all their leftover bits from their previous kits, so that they can go, cool, I'm going to buy another 10, and I'm going to make 5 guys with heavy bolters, because I've got my heavy bolters left over from my kit, and then another 5 guys with melter guns, and then I'm going to put a melter gun and a heavy bolter in each one of my existing units, creating essentially 1 more unit, but now every unit has the war gear upgrades. You can do that, but you shouldn't have to, is my point. It's unnecessary, and it doesn't actually really solve anything. It doesn't solve anything that couldn't be equally solved in another way. Like, if the argument is, oh, Marines are underperforming, we need to give them some kind of advantage to get them back into competitive, balance, The answer is, like, one answer could be to give them free war gear, and yes, that will make them more powerful on the tabletop. That's undeniable. But maybe the better solution would be to reduce their base points cost, you know, or increase the base points cost of the things that are strong, that are out competing them, or give them some kind of special rule or something like that. Like, you don't need to fundamentally change the way that we purchase units. And that's why I believe that one of the things they're planning for 10th edition is to have free war gear. And on everything, game-wide, I think they're going to have free war gear. I think they're going to try and, because part of the mission statement for 10th edition is to simplify the game. So I think what they're going to do is they're just going to have every unit in the game gets free war gear. You just purchase units, and then you bring the units to the table, and that's the game. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if they also changed the, you know, variable unit size in the same way that Chaos Demons had that treatment, where it's like, no, you take units of 10. You can't take units of 15 or 20. You take units of 10 of the lesser demons. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. Like, tactical squads are just 10 man. I wouldn't be surprised. But yeah, I believe that what they're doing is they're testing it now, where they're like, okay, let's give Marines free war gear. Let's keep everybody else having to pay for their war gear. And let's gauge how the community reacts. You know, how does the community feel about free war gear? And then they've probably got two different sets of points values running around for their playtesters at the moment. They've probably got one set where everything gets free war gear and has, you know, whatever points cost associated with the unit. And then they'll have another rules set running around where they've got, this is everybody having to pay for all of their war gear. And I mean, from a different perspective, it would make the game slightly easier to balance for them, because instead of them having to identify what war gear is overpowered, you know, what war gear do they need to nerf? Are Thunderhammers too good for 10 points? Should they be 12 points? Should they be 11 points? Like, you know, that can be challenging for them to resolve when they have to resolve that across everything. Whereas if they just went everything as free war gear, they could just look at it and be like, are tactical squads too good, or are they not good enough? You know, and then they could bump the whole squad up or down based on that. I just think it sucks so much of the nuance out of the game. I remember in early 9th edition, they basically said, I think it was early 9th, it might have even been early 8th. Either way, at the start of one of these recent editions, they said that they were increasing the points costs of everything across the board, with the goal of making it more granular. Because, like, if you've got a guardsman, an orc gaunt, a cultist, and all of these things are 5 points each, but they're slightly different. One's slightly better than the other, and one's slightly worse than the other. It's like, if you increase all of those to be, instead of 5 points each, let's be dramatic and say 50 points each. Well, now you could make one of them 45 points, one 50, and one 55 points per model. And now they're all still, if you look at it from a 4 being 40 points, 5 being 50 points, they're still all between 4 and 6 points. So, which is 5 in the current rule set. But if you 10x'd the points of everything, you would then give yourself 10 increments between 4 points and 5 points. And that would allow them to actually make much more granular changes and like fine-tune the balance of units. And that's something that I thought was brilliant. Like, there's no reason why we have to run 2,000 point lists. You could call that list a 20,000 point list and then just go, cool, it's the same army, it's just 20,000 points, and everything that costs 10 points now costs 100 points, and it's exactly the same. But what that would do is that would allow you to go, these Thunderhammers, instead of them being 10 points, they're actually, say they're 80 points, or 90 points, or 95 points, It would allow you to really, like, change the units on a granular basis. And when they said that they were doing this, I was like, this is brilliant. They didn't say that they were going to 10x everything, but they just said that you will notice everything goes up in points, but don't freak out. The reason that we're doing this is to give ourselves more granularity for, rules balance and adjustments, and everything's going to still work more or less the same, but everything across the board will be more expensive. And if everything becomes more expensive, nothing becomes more expensive, right? So they announced that they were doing this, and I was super excited, and I thought this was a good direction for GW. They made a really smart decision here, and then they just sort of never did it, and then they immediately started rolling back all the points costs to making everything cheaper again. And then now they're going even further, and they're giving everything free war gear, and it's like, what are you doing? You're going the wrong way. Like, they should be making you have to pay for everything. Anything outside of the standard loadout should have to be purchased. And the same goes for vehicles. Like, there's a lot of vehicles now that have free war gear, and I'm like, that's so uninspired. I don't want every single vehicle to have a hunter killer missile. I don't want every single rhino having extra storm bolters on it. I want to be able to choose, do I upgrade my rhino or not? Because the other side to this coin is that a lot of the character in your army comes from the upgrades that you choose to give it. The way that you wield that unit, the way that you upgrade the units, that's what gives it a lot of its flavor. And removing that from the options available to a player just really sucks the fun out of it. It sucks the creative out of it. It sucks the uniqueness out of it. And I just hate it. I hate it so much. So yeah, that's my thoughts on free war gear. I really hope that somebody at GW hears this and has a bit of awakening and goes, no, Dean's right, we should go back to what we had initially planned and increase the points cost of everything to give granularity to the balance, and then also adding granularity to the list builds by giving people the option to purchase war gear. So yeah, that's my thoughts. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let's have a conversation. Let me know what you guys think about free war gear. Do you think it's a good thing for the game? Do you think it's a good thing for the players? Do you think that they are doing this just to test it for 10th edition? Or do you think that this was a genuine attempt to balance an underperforming codex? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I look forward to having a conversation with you there. And as always, please like, subscribe, all that good shit. Head over to the Patreon, sign up there. You gain access to our Discord server where we have great chats in there. And yeah, I look forward to talking to you guys in the next one. Cheers.
Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, all that good shit. And also head over to our Patreon where you can get Patreon exclusive dice. I do coaching and training sessions. We'll talk through lists. I'll help you strategize. We also have apparel like the shirt that I'm wearing now. You can pick them up there. There's also neoprene objective markers, and we have just launched neoprene battle mats. So we've got all your bases covered over in that Patreon. So make sure to check that out. Huge thank you to those who already have done so. You help me improve the quality and content and in the frequency of the content and all of those sorts of things. I very, very much deeply appreciate your support. And yeah, I look forward to joining you in the Patreon Discord for some conversations post video. So thanks for tuning in, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.
Welcome to the Black God.